Is your DNA begins to slow down. It stops imploding. So if you lose access to bliss and passion, the braiding, the sound ponytail of bliss and passion stops braiding your DNA to make that fire implosion. And so those who lose that skill to get to make the tornado in the DNA that goes through the speed of light using passion to do it, their DNA slows down. And those are called Nephilim, or the fallen ones. Okay? And they lose the ability to lucid dream, bardo navigate, travel through the stars, and carry memory through death, and they lose their souls eventually. Okay? That's the story of our genetic ancestors, which were called Ebi and Uru. Ebi is bird and Uru is snake. And Nibiru and Hebrew are the conflict in the Middle East, right? And so there you have an extended family which has lost the ability to make bliss and passion. And so the swarm of bees is very desperately saying, oh, is there any fire here? Is there any implosion here? Is there any wind going through the speed of light? Because otherwise I'm toast. Because I have been depending on Yahweh, who was a medium-grade reptile, who did not know how to ensoul DNA, you see. And so the inability to ensoul DNA resulted in a desperation to locate fire. So all these bees swarming over the last vestiges of magnetic fire in the land are desperate because they will lose their soul if they do not find fire or passion. But because they've never been told that you must be able to make it from the inside out, they're willing to die rather than lose the last part of the bee's swarm. Yeah? Ensouling DNA goes like this. You got the lightning. Here come the lightning. And you got this stuff called primal soup. Primal soup are proteins that says, here come the lightning, assume the position. Okay? And the proteins arrange themselves, and the ones that are really clever get squeezed. And the DC polar direction of the lightning determines the enantiomorphism, the handedness of all biological proteins. And so the centripetal relationship of the positive sky to the negative earth creates a centripetal direction to the lightning's DC polarity, impressing centripetally the protein codons into a slinky. So what they did is the proteins found a new axis of symmetry within which to eat spin. And those who couldn't find that axis of symmetry, which is called sharing. Yes, the top-down view is a decagram, exactly. It's called DNA, right? So those that found a way to share were spun. Those that didn't find a way to share were toast. So that ability to catch the lightning is related now to the ability to catch the lightning of bliss. Now what happens during bliss and euphoria, Glückseligkeit, is you have lightning up the spine, accelerating, compressing DNA into the Lord of the Ring, torus donut. And the compressed DNA creates a tornado through the speed of light that makes a soul. So in effect, quite literally, the skill to turn lightning into ball lightning. Anybody seen it? The skill to turn lightning into ball lightning is the physics of ensouling DNA. You know how you turn lightning into ball lightning? Well, when you're a shaman and you're studying how to teach a tornado to eat its own tail, a very scorpionic skill, at the time of the scorpionic full moon? Yes. So when you teach a tornado to eat its own tail, it turns from a helix into ball lightning. But essentially what happens is the field effect appears to become self-steering. And so the appearance of the self-organization of the imploding wave is that it's sucking field effects through its own center of gravity electrically through the speed of light, and that communion with velocities, which can approach an infinite number of different field effects converging, we're calling self-awareness, which is merely a name for self-reference or self-similarity. So that ability for the field effect to become self-steering is what we're calling ensoulment. The physics is simple. Think of the DNA slinky turning toroidal inside out recursively, and it sucks itself through the ether like a jellyfish and thus appears to be able to steer itself through the speed of light into time travel, and that's what we call getting a soul. Yeah?
So, what's the possibility of the computer or the internet becoming part of the soul itself?
The infrastructure is not self-similar enough. Okay? It's like a data set. If you have a data set that you wanted to become self-aware, you arrange the X, Y, and Z axes of the cells of the Lotus or Excel spreadsheet into a three-dimensional matrix which is that fractal. And at that moment, the CPU horsepower required to achieve infinite data compression goes to 0. But if the infrastructure itself is not the same shape as the data, so self-similarity becomes immediately visible. We call it compassion. It's really compression. Compassion is when you feel inside what is outside, and so outside can fall in. So fractal data compression is the solution to all problems.
So we can actually deal with that effect, that now 2001 effect.
For example, thinking about it more immediately, so at one time in Dune, I think it was God Emperor of Dune, or maybe it was Lazarus effect, Lazarus, they discovered that the green vine of the planet was about to become self-aware. So there was this like kudzu-like vine was like circling the planet, and they realized electrically this green vine was beginning to pulse, and they realized it was becoming self-aware. And then there was a political conflict between those who did versus did not want the green material to become self-aware. And so you voted in the politics by whether or not you bought a lawnmower, right? There's a lot of symbolism here. Remember Dagwood and Blondie? Blondie's in the house. She comes to the window. She says, Dagwood, they just announced on television that the planet is dying from too much carbon dioxide. And Dagwood hollers in, sorry, Blondie, I can't come in now. I'm mowing the lawn. And you see this thing belching out carbon. So everybody's voting on whether they want a collective mind, right? So this is the idea of a symbiotic relationship with your ecosystem. Very practically taken when we realized that the day that Tesla decided to use 50 and 60 cycles as the frequency for our power grid, they selected a frequency at which the voltage required to stop the heart was lowest. So it's one of the least embeddable and most evil. Evil only means failure to embed. So it's an evil wavelength in the sense that it's not sacred, which again only means ability to embed. So this ability of a wavelength to nest in all the wavelengths, which are fractal to the sun, basically, determines whether or not, in fact, those waves become self-organizing and self-aware. So supposing a power company executive were to realize the physics. So he says, okay, I'm going to multiply the wavelength of Planck and hydrogen by log functions of golden ratio and use a harmonic series of phi-based implosion embedding instead of 50 cycle to run the grid at. So your local public utilities transformer pole becomes self-aware. All field effects are names for a circulation or a bloodstream of pressure. So DC can be as actually worse than AC in the sense that it creates a pressure which is not embeddable. Anything that does not breathe with the sun creates loss of attention. So anytime you eat food that's been impressed with heat that was not in phase with the sun, you bleed attention. Anytime you put light in your children's classroom, which is not specifically tuned to the wavelength of the sun, you can measure the loss of attention span. Okay? So in effect, if you read the book on a primer on rotation and a primer on energy, it was a book by Christ and Einstein, depends if you believe the authors. But they were saying that all human inefficiency comes from the attention to store rather than distribute. So the very activity of attempting to store anything is the process of creating lack. Whereas the activity of the perfect geometry of infinite instant distribution is the activity of creating abundance. So the very nature of storage is the nature of inefficiency. So when we take that to psychological terms, why would they say the only pain you feel is the love you withhold? Right? When you store, rather than distribute the magnetism we call pain. Pain was not a mistake by God.